everybody, and welcome to the Week in Review, where we take a look back at the week that was and discuss some of the interesting bits of news that have come out of it in a very unscripted, casual way. So first up this week, we have some good news, excellent news in fact, because there was the New Game Plus Expo, which is of particular interest to people who enjoy their Japanese games, because all the big localization outfits and publishers show up to show off what they got coming. And we've got a lot of interesting games. Axis, for example, they have a huge lineup of stuff coming, and they showed us a lot in New Game Plus Expo, including Code Realize, Fishing Fighters, which is an interesting game you should definitely look into, Undernauts, Labyrinth of Yomi, Olympia Soiree, Dairoku, Agents of Sakuratani, apologies for that, and Variable Barricade. So there are a lot of interesting games that are coming from Axis, which is a specialist, I guess, in visual novels and quite quirky Japanese games. Then there was also Nipponichi. They showed up with a couple of titles to share. Disgaea 6 is probably their big one. That comes out on June 29, and it's a very exciting game indeed. Who doesn't like a bit of Disgaea? Then there is also Prinny Presents NIS Classics Volume 1, which is a collection of games including Phantom Brave, Soul Nomad, and World Eaters. And yeah, it's collection 1, so there may be more to come. Soul Nomad is another one that was actually listed in this one, so I did say that, didn't I? Soul Nomad. Anyway, the collection 1 is 2 games, I think, and it's a pretty good looking pack. Hopefully there's more of it. And perhaps most exciting for me, there was a Silver Case 2425, which is a Goichi Suda title, visual novel thing. I really like the previous ones that I've played, so I'm looking forward to that. That was good to see. It was on its way as well. Then Idea Factory also had some as well, so just quickly mentioning them. Mary Skelter Finale is coming. There is also Neptunia Reverse got a release date for June 11 on PlayStation 5. And then there was also Death End Request coming to Nintendo Switch. So a lot of interesting titles. That's just 3 of the publishers. Definitely worth checking out the rest of what you saw, what was showed off at this event, because it is an interesting one, and I was very happy to see all the Japanese games that I'll be playing for the rest of the year. Next up, there was a bit of news for Nintendo Mario fans in particular, with Nintendo confirming that at the end of the month, a couple of the 35th anniversary specials for the Mario Brothers series will be discontinued as intended. So you may remember that back when they announced the Mario 3D collection, as well as Super Mario 35, I think that's what it's called, the Battle Royale that they announced and released last year, they also said that they were going to be turning off those servers for those games. And that is still happening. So as of March 31st, I believe, you will no longer be able to play Mario 35, the Battle Royale. And on top of that, for some reason, they're going to stop making, selling, and distributing the Super Mario 3D collection, and that means no more physical copies printed. It will be taken off the e-store and completely unavailable, so if you want it, you should grab it now. You've only got a couple of weeks left to do so. And I find this fascinating. I have absolutely no idea why Nintendo would do this. For one thing, the Battle Royale, the Mario 35 game, that is still very popular. A lot of people are still playing it, loving it, having a great time with it. It makes no sense to turn it off at this stage. I understand why a publisher would want to turn off the servers for a game that is really not that popular anymore, because it costs money to maintain a server, of course. But why you would do it for a game that is still very much active, still very much beloved, and could grow into something if they wanted to expand on it, makes no sense to me whatsoever. And it makes even less sense to me that they would remove a game from sale. Once again, I understand the idea to stop printing cartridges once a game has stopped selling at retail at great numbers, but to just take it off the e-store completely makes no sense, because it's just money, you know? There's no downside to leaving a game on an e-store. I don't understand Nintendo's strategy with this. I mean, a lot of the time we don't understand Nintendo's strategy in general, but in particular, I just don't understand these 2 decisions that Nintendo has made. Nonetheless, they have made them, they are sticking to them, so you have until the end of the month to play and enjoy the Battle Royale and to grab yourself a copy of the excellent 3D Mario collection. Next up, we have another thing that you are going to want to jump on quite soon because it's not going to run for too much longer. This time around, it's a survey. Now, normally a survey wouldn't be anything worth really mentioning, but in this case it is because it comes to us from Onion Games. And Onion Games is the publisher that is known for bringing us Moon to the West for the first time. Moon being the brilliantly intelligent, artsy, transgressive, subversive game that kind of plays on the JRPG genre. Onion likes artsy cult games, and one of the games, at least the one that's of most interest to me, that they're considering localizing is Rule of Rose, which was a PlayStation 2 horror game that is infamous for being very janky, very difficult to play because it's not a fun game in that sense, but it is a cult classic because it is apparently, I've never actually seen it or played it, but it is apparently a genius kind of game in terms of its thought, its narrative, and all those kinds of elements that I really like. So I certainly went and put my vote in for that. It's also notoriously difficult to find. It did get an English release, but in tiny quantities. So I have never had the chance to play it. It is a famously cult game. I highly recommend that you go and fill in this survey. There are other games there that will be of interest as well, but that one was for me. But I have a link to the survey in the description box underneath this video. Please do go and register your interest with Onion Games because they are a wonderfully creative localization and publisher outfit. They are looking at bringing us Rule of Rose, and I cannot state enough how much I desperately want to play this game. So that's what I certainly filled in. I made sure that I shared my interest in that game. I highly recommend you do as well. Okay, so next up we have a topic that is a little bit outside of the video game industry, but I do think it is relevant to games as well. And it has to do with the Golden Globes, which was the big film event that happened over the last week. And it did create a bit of a debate because both the Golden Globes and the Academy Awards have an award called Best Foreign Film. And until Parasite came along and won basically everything 2 years ago or whatever it was, there has been this idea that foreign films are these weird things with subtitles which are not of a standard equivalent to American films, and therefore they need their own category to be recognized. They can't compete with what the Americans do, which is of course it comes across as very xenophobic, and that was a word that was used a lot in debates this week. And I think it definitely, we need to get rid of that foreign language film. We need to consider all films as equals and on their merits rather than whether they came from America or otherwise. I think this is relevant to the video game industry as well, because we do have this sense that the West, particularly America, to a lesser extent, the UK, Europe and Australia, but particularly America, is the only market worth chasing in video games. And anything that kind of exists outside of that market must not be relevant. Konami, for example, is famous for having some very popular games in Japan, but because it doesn't localize those in America, people think that Konami's just given up on video games because they're not localizing, or they're not creating new Suikoden games or their other kind of Metal Gear games. They're not creating popular games designed for Americans anymore, therefore they must be a dying company. They're not. They're a very healthy company that is focused on the Japanese market. There was also news this week that a visual novel creator has listed on the stock exchange in Japan, and it has been one of the most successful listings in recent times, but they don't localize their games into the West because they're otome visual novels. They do localize them into Korean and Chinese, but not into English, and people didn't really know this company existed. The point being that I think we need to shift our perceptions that the only markets worth chasing are the American ones, and that unless you do so, you can't have a successful game. And if you don't pander to that American audience, then you're not going to be able to create a game that's a success, or something that's interesting and worth playing, because that's just not the case. Finally, this week I want to talk about a Twitter meme that has been doing the rounds and particularly annoys me because it suggests some things about the video game industry which I am not fond of on any level, and that is the "you just had to be there" meme. So a lot of publishers of older games have been digging into screenshots of their back catalogue to share screenshots from PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64, Super Nintendo, whatever else. And they've been doing so with the text just being "you just had to be there." The implication being, of course, that these are classic games that people love, and are getting very nostalgic for, and you just had to be there to experience them to remember how great they were as such. The problem with that being, of course, that this is an implicit admission that these games are not really accessible anymore, you can't really play them, and that raises the whole question about just how terrible the video game industry has been at archiving and preserving and making its classic works of art available to consumers in years afterwards. Because it is a big problem. You know, if games are works of art, then they have value beyond their immediate commercial potential, and they should be preserved, they should be experienced, and they should be talked about for many generations down the track. You don't throw out the Mona Lisa once it hits 100 years old. You preserve it, you look after it, and it becomes this kind of cultural icon. Video games aren't quite at that point yet because the publishers don't see any value in these things beyond what they can immediately get out of them. Sony, for example, I mean, the tweet that made me want to do this segment came from PlayStation UK. Sony is infamous because its current head of PlayStation actually went out there and said, I don't see any value in these games because they're just not good enough graphics, or whatever was his comment. And I find that insulting. If video games are a work of art, then it is not just about how good they look at the moment, because I'm telling you right now, PlayStation 4 games, PlayStation 5 games, they're going to look dated in a couple of decades. Does that mean they have no value? Does that mean there's no works of art being created now? We, as an industry, we need to shift the thinking away from just the commercial potential of these games and actually realize that the old ones are worth preserving, and you don't just have to be there to experience them, you should be able to experience them now.